Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Whether it's Crown or the Star, I don't reckon a day's gone by in the last few weeks when we haven't mentioned the gaming sector. We've had some extraordinary revelations and allegations come out of the inquiry into the Star in New South Wales. In one case, the casino allegedly processed almost $1 million from one gambler as payment for 27 nights of accommodation that he didn't actually use, before providing the money back to him for use on the casino floor. That man spent almost $100 million over 15 years using a banned China Union pay card. On another occasion, the casino was allegedly dealing with a member of a Chinese triad gang and did nothing about it for 3 months. It also emerged that CEO Matt Behaviour had slammed a 2018 KPMG report that had been critical of the Star's anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing systems. Mr. Behaviour, of course, resigned last week. Meanwhile, Crown Resorts is still on track to be sold to US investment giant Blackstone, having kept its licence to operate a casino in Western Australia. Crown's had a shocking couple of years, facing inquiries in New South Wales, Victoria and WA, which uncovered widespread money laundering and dealing with organised crime. So much and all that. Peter Deans is a former Chief Risk Officer and founder of Not Without Risk Consulting. He was also the independent expert advisor to the Victorian and Western Australian Royal Commissions into Crown Casino. Peter, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Hi, Sean. Good to be back again.
What is it about the gaming sector that seems to make these issues so widespread?
It's interesting, isn't it? I worked with a security guy many years ago, and he often said to me, he said, you know why people rob banks? He said, that's where the money is. And I think the same goes for casinos. I think the volumes of money that they turn over, the nature of the business, inherently attracts a lot of money looking for a place to be laundered or find a home.
Is it possible for a gaming company to be run profitably with a good return to shareholders, with good governance, with no ill doings, in Australia, anywhere in the world for that matter?
Yeah, look, I'm probably firstly say I'm not a gaming industry expert, and probably more on the risk management side of things. But yeah, I'd like to believe that properly managed, properly regulated, with the checks and balances in place, even large publicly listed gaming corporations can effectively be run cleanly. But it takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of alignment of things like roles and responsibilities, performance incentives, have the right culture in place, and ultimately you need everything to work well from board level down.
Yeah, I want to get into the Star in a moment, but what you said up front, it's where the money is. I suppose if we think in the last 3 or 4 years, the Banking Royal Commission, there was criminal activity, it wasn't sort of senior bankers, it was individuals within organisations undertaking allegedly criminal activity. So it kind of isn't only the gaming companies. The banks themselves have fallen foul of anti-money laundering, particularly in the case of Westpac. So it may be, I'm just thinking aloud here, Peter, it's not really unique to gaming.
No, it's a broader question around really society and how the business world operates. You've had infiltration of criminal gangs in large parts of the business activities, not just in Australia and overseas. Whether it's the auto industry, whether it's all parts of financial services like payday lending, also had many challenges for years. Financial services, gaming, hospitality, more generally. I think, unfortunately, the capitalist society we work in, the criminal elements, they do follow the money. They find the gap to go through, and I think that's a little bit where the casino industry found itself in the last decade. Was there were clearly some gaps across many of the main players, and the criminal elements, they found the gap.
Stay with me, Peter. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Peter Deans, a former Chief Risk Officer and founder of Not Without Risk Consulting, and independent expert advisor to the Victorian and WA Royal Commissions into Crown Casino. Okay, so is there anything out of the inquiry into the Star thus far that's shocked you?
Yeah, look, I'm not involved in Star in any way, and as you touched on, my role last year was with Crown. But I think from just listening to the hearings and also some of the commentary that's come out, you've got similar issues would appear to be emerging where the risk governance and oversight, the understanding of the risks, was probably not all through the organisation. I think there was clearly some people within Star and even the external advisors. You mentioned the KPMG report that was tabled. They clearly touched on issues that looked quite similar to what came out of the Crown Royal Commissions, yet they either weren't properly socialised or perhaps the issues that the severity and magnitude of the issues wasn't recognised, or perhaps there was a desire to either turn a blind eye or perhaps to try and sort of rationalise that things were being done to mitigate and address the issues. And I guess the hearings to continue and the final report come out will answer the question of what exactly happened. But I think there's a combination of reasons why things have happened from what's been talked about so far.
It seems that in the case of the Crown, they lost a CEO and a chair. We now have the Star having lost a CEO at this point. Certainly the responsibility does start at the top, it seems.
Oh, look, I think the way corporate governance in Australia works, there's quite clearly a responsibility that sits with the board, and ultimately the chair is the peak role in corporate governance in Australia. And the CEO, all CEOs are remunerated handsomely to make it all work and bring it all together. So clearly the buck stops with both. It's interesting. I said this sort of alignment of remuneration, the risk and reward being right. And in the case of the CEOs that resign or fall on their sword, the question is, well, is it their responsibility to get the risk and reward right, or what is the role of the board, or is it a joint collective responsibility? And I think the way it sort of panned out with Crown, again, I think the expectation of stakeholders, be it regulators, investors, is that there is individual responsibility for the CEO and chair, but there's also a collective responsibility for the board and the management teams.
Why would you be on a board of a casino group then? So I totally appreciate what you're saying there, Peter, but in the case of Crown particularly, there are a number of people on that board who, they're not unique in this by any stretch, didn't really know what was going on day to day. And to be honest, most boards don't know what's going on day to day.
Well, I think on that last point, we've probably got another session on the role of boards more generally, but I think the directors, irrespective of the size of the company or how much they're paid, they are actually paid to know what's going on. And I think what came out of Crown was that some of the directors clearly saw the part-time role as being very, very high-level governance and oversight, and probably in my terms a little G and a little O, governance and oversight. But ultimately, I think there's an expectation that directors, even if they are part-time roles, do need to have a depth of understanding of the industry, the regulatory frameworks that they're involved in, and financial services and casinos and gaming. It's very heavily regulated industries, and I don't think you could really let the directors off by saying it's a part-time role, therefore they couldn't know what was going on. I think that's really the skill that good directors have, is even though they may only be coming in once a month for a day or two, and the larger organisations, it's probably 3 or 4 full-time days a month. I think you've got reasonable expectation that directors know this. I think where the challenge comes, and this is does get talked about quite a bit, is where you've got directors with large portfolios of 5 and 6 boards. It may actually be difficult to be across all of the issues, to have sort of side conversations with the executives, to get to know the CEO outside the formal construct of the board. And I think that's where a lot of the more savvy directors are saying, I really want to limit the number of board roles I have, because I think realistically it's difficult to do more than 3 or 4, certainly if they're larger, more complex businesses.
Okay, so Crown's board did accept your recommendations. You wrote a report for the Victorian Royal Commission on the Crown's board's governance and risk management. What were some of the recommendations, or at least the main ones that they accepted of your recommendations, which kind of addresses exactly what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think there was a number. There's 22 recommendations in total. I think some of the more important ones for Crown ultimately was a reasonably complex business, because it had the Melbourne casino, it had a Perth casino, it was in the process of building Sydney, and it, under the regulatory and licensing requirements, had to do a whole lot of things around organisational oversight and compliance. And Crown actually had a series of governance bodies and management committees for both Melbourne and for Perth. And I think at the end of the day, there was an element of, oh, we thought that board or that audit committee was doing certain things, and it was a bit like the fingers pointing each way. And ultimately, you didn't actually have a lot bubbling up to the Crown Resorts board level, certainly not in the way you would expect to see it given the nature of its regulatory requirements. And then I think also the audit committee at Crown Resorts, somewhat paradoxically, never really actually received any audit reports per se. And whilst the charter did talk about audit responsibilities, it was a little bit light on. And it was really because it was actually delegating down to some of the other governance forums. I think the other area, which is probably a bit of a lesson for some boards more broadly, was it just didn't, from my review, it didn't seem to spend enough time discussing in depth a lot of the the risk issues it had. And this is only my speculation, but I did feel a bit of a sense of they were talking themselves into the fact that particular issues had been addressed, whether it was anti-money laundering or whether it was around conduct within the casinos. So there was an element of probably say it's groupthink. I didn't use that term in the papers, but there was an element of they talked themselves into the fact that everything was okay. And I think you saw parallels with that in the Financial Services Royal Commission, where I think the boards ultimately felt that they were satisfied everything was okay, or it wasn't possibly as bad as it was. But history has shown that wasn't the case.
So, just sort of taking, you sort of refer to this, but other companies outside gaming and even outside banking, what can they take from this, particularly boards? It's almost like if you're not sure, ask the question, or stay away from groupthink.
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly highlighted to directors the personal and reputational downside of taking for granted either what you read or being told by management. And boards and executives do need to have a collaborative approach and relationship, but ultimately the board and individual directors do need to think about, am I being told the right things? Is what's being presented to me accurate? So I think there's a question I would always pose with directors on, is there a sufficient challenge underway with management? I think that's an important one. I've sort of sat on the executive side of the table, and it can be a bit confronting being, challenged by directors, and you always get a bit of a sense of, well, do they trust me? But ultimately, I think directors and boards need to sort of sit back and think about, is what I'm being presented and the answers being given, are they really what's happening? And I think what we've seen with both Star and Crown is that there were independent parties brought in, and perhaps they weren't listened to enough, or perhaps some of the findings were dismissed a little bit out of hand, and the boards accepted what was presented. So I think that challenge process is important. I was also just going to say, I think the other thing for particularly smaller to medium-sized listed companies is that a lot of them, either don't have an audit and risk committee, or they might just have a merged audit and risk committee. I think the roles of both are fundamentally different. And if you look at the ASX principles and recommendations, they do talk about the importance of having, an audit committee and also a risk committee. And I think, what we've seen the last couple of years with the pandemic, the rise of cybersecurity, I think there's a very strong argument for boards to set up dedicated risk management committees. And also have some management resources, such as a risk management department or a chief risk officer that is actually looking at these issues.
Peter, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Great to be back again. Thanks.
That was Peter Deans, a former Chief Risk Officer and founder of Not Without Risk Consulting, and of course an independent expert advisor to the Victorian and Western Australia Royal Commissions into Crown Casino. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.